Hello, I'm Larry Smarr. I'm Director of Cal IT2 at UCSD, where we'll be seeing many of you Thursday night. I've got a very interesting person to interview, a person who's been a CEO of a major telecom company, Orange in the United Kingdom, US West in the United States, and Telstra in Australia. In fact, he may be the only person that's had such experience. So I'm actually quite interested in getting to dig a little bit into the comparative experience he's had. But I think following on what we just heard, Saul, what I'd like to do is get a sense of where you think the world of telecommunications is going, and can some of that growth help get us out of the situation we're in now? So from what you've seen, what's exciting you now?
Well, I think our industry is the most exciting industry, just simply because of what's implied in your question, and that is growth. We are at the center of almost every economy in the world. We make things happen, we make things move, and when you think about costs, when you think about leveraging capital, it's always about productivity. And I think that there are many case studies, and my most recent one is at Telstra, where we have dramatically improved productivity in the business while taking a company that lagged essentially its peers around the world to the top. And it was all about investing in the technology, but it was with kind of a core principle in mind, and that's about ultimately what is the benefit to the consumers that you serve or to your business that you run. And in the case of the consumers, for me, it's always about people want more. They want faster, they want bigger, they want real time, they want a lot of things that are part of their daily life. In the case of business, in today's kind of economic environment, it's always about productivity. How can I leverage my capital? How can I leverage, my people within a business to drive either profitability, returns, cash flows, or whatever the metrics are? And that's what we've done essentially in the last 4 years at Telstra.
Well, as you see now, we've got this mix of mobile and fixed broadband, and both are set to actually take quite large leaps as we go forward, and I think we'll talk about both. Tell me a little bit about mobile. What are you seeing in the next few years in that space?
Well, I get excited when I talk about mobile. Part of it was I got this injection of this untethered world when I was running Orange. I used to give a speech several years ago about the fact that I thought the mobile device was going to become the remote control to your life. And I think if you look around at most people's lives, and I was watching people this morning, everybody's doing something, always on the go, always about being real time. What's happened now in the last 3-4 years is that speed, the dimension of enabling what I would call a real-time experience, has now become possible. Wireless has always been good for calling, voice calling. It became a good experience for SMSing or texting. But now, one of the bets we made at Telstra 4 years ago essentially was that it could become a replacement and essentially a device and a service that could be the device that you use or service that you use for virtually anything. So what does that mean? That means that today people in Australia are not only making voice calls, not only texting, but they're making video calls. They're delivering health care. Educational field trips are being taken by children that live maybe in the interior part of the country or the bush, going to the Great Barrier Reef and literally seeing, all the marine life, everything that they can without having to get on an airplane or a bus or whatever to get there. Businesses are changing how they operate. In the case of Telstra, in 3 years, we improved our field force productivity by 50%, 50, just by leveraging technologies, having techs with embedded laptops in all their trucks, our next G devices, which were 3G high speed, where They could work remotely, download data, interact with data, update records, see everything. It's fundamentally changed how the company is operated, but I would argue it has changed Australia.
Right. And of course, we're seeing things like the netbook, which are becoming much more like in between the desktop and laptop and the cell phone, all of the iPhones and Blackberries. I had to take my Blackberry off. I'm feeling a little bit nervous right now. I've got internet separation anxiety because I can't do this while Saul's talking, you know. I think you have a video, I think, of some of the young people, what they're thinking about. Can we look at that?
Yeah. Just before, as a quick intro, when I first went to Telstra, it was about doing a turnaround, a transformation. And it was a company that was government controlled, government owned, all that sort of thing. And we needed to make a break from the past. And it was about changing the game because we were also losing market share, et cetera, et cetera. So my bet was a big bet on wireless and the fact that we could start with 3.6 megabits per second, move to 7.2 megabits per second, move to 14. Now the network is operating today in Australia at 21 megabits per second. We've already invested to take it to 42 megabits per second, wireless, nationwide kind of capabilities. And it has a roadmap to go even higher, pushing 100 megabits per second. Well, we needed to create a vision, a view, and so we thought we would ask some experts about how to think about the future. So let's turn on the video here.
A map, a camera, a radio, a shop, a stereo, a TV, a telephone.
Now Telstra gives you more ways to do more things in more places.
So the paradigm shifted, right? It wasn't so much about calling.
Right,
It's about
right.
all the other things that you can do. And that paradigm has now shifted. And it's now moving across the world where 3G is being deployed in developed markets as well as developing markets. We now have nearly 4 billion mobile users around the world, going to 5, going to 6. It is a phenomenon that will be the connective tissue for the world.
Well, and I think we heard last night from Professor Ramanathan in India, essentially villagers in many of the 600,000 villages have cell phones and are able to actually provide, in that case, sensor input on the black carbon and air pollution that are critical to understand where to deploy the technology and the global warming. You wouldn't think of that as a cell phone application, and yet there he is talking about it.
Well, I think, Larry, you and I may have had some intersection, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, when we were looking at wireless sensor technology once upon a time.
Right.
And we were looking at applications like this because M2M, machine-to-machine kinds of enabled monitoring is going to be the next big thing for, this industry. And, we're talking about hundreds of billions of devices as opposed to billions of people.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And in fact, we're seeing, when we started Cal IT2, the phrase we used was extending the internet throughout the physical world. And what you're seeing now is, like in global warming, 40% of the greenhouse gases in the US are produced in the built infrastructure of the buildings. Those now are going to get sensors, actuators throughout 100 million built infrastructure. And you multiply, say, you think of that as having 100 or something, that's 10 billion right there, just in the US, just in its buildings. So it seemed crazy that we're getting to billions of cell phones, but yet you're absolutely right that we're going to be very soon, and even tens to hundreds of billions of wireless endpoints. Now, one of the things that you've talked about is the gigabit age, and I think we're sort of getting at that because if you think of the data that's generated, it's vast. You gave a speech last fall in which you were talking about the gigabit age. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. You know, I've obviously had a belief, you know, back when I was running US West and at Orange and now most recently at Telstra about where markets are going. I mean, I like seeing around curves and corners. And part of, you know, the conversations that had been going on in Australia, but I think around the world, had been about talking about megabits and speeds, you know, that were enhancements to where everything is. But what most people tend to forget is that we multitask. And there's multiple people that live in homes and multiple people that are in businesses and all of that. And simultaneous use is a big phenomenon. Right. And when we think about simultaneous use and we think about the need for gigabit kinds of capacity and speeds, you know, your eye apparently operates at about a gigabit.
That's correct.
Per second. So you start thinking about all the things that you could do as substitutes or supplements or complements to everything that we do, either in business, personal life, viewing sports, having fun, being entertained. All of that is coming. The biggest challenge has not been so much about whether the speed will be there or the capacity will be there, because I think technology has proven, you know, there's roadmaps to that. It's how do you deliver it in a way that is simple, easy to use. And to me, that's where the big breakthroughs come through. Right. And that's been the key now with the wireless world. We've had lots of devices that could do lots of things for the last 10, 15 years. The problem is most people didn't do them, right. Didn't use them, because you had to go through 18 clicks or you had to wait too long for access, you know, all the way to the server and back, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're breaking those. We're cutting them, we're slicing them. The iPhone, great example of changing a user experience so that now data use becomes, you know, explosive. Right. And so I would say, Larry, that this notion of a gigabit age is not very far away. I think that the capital is there to be invested because some of us are starting to see where the returns can be, that people can actually make money, much like the bets that we made on high-speed, you know, wireless broadband networks.
Right. Well, I mean, it's great to hear someone from the telecom talk about the gigabit age. You know, I live there, but the idea that the mass market is getting close is pretty inspiring. I mean, the problem I've seen, I think, you know, you've been a person who's brought new kinds of technology over and over again into a market instead of just incrementally tweaking what was already there. How do you do that? I mean, you know, I always find when you ask people, do you want another factor of 10? They say, no, I'm pretty good. And yet, before long, they're using that factor of 10, can't get enough of it. How do you skate to where the puck's going to be?
Well, first of all, I love that phrase because you know, as businesses are evolving in today's world, the speed at which you have to move has accelerated. And so what it means is that you don't have the time to incrementalize your business. So it means you have to make bets. And if you're going to make a bet, you have to have beliefs. And in order to have beliefs, you have to have some insight. And so, you know, spending a lot of time doing research, spending a lot of time watching consumer behavior, spending a lot of time, in my case, I'm a zealot about real customer research and segmentation, but needs-based segmentation. Mm-hmm. Not about use, not about things you've done, but about really looking forward on the things that you want to do or solve. When you have a fairly good sense of that, then you do develop your belief, and therefore then you have to make bets. The problem is that you can be wrong.
Right.
And that's, to me, you know, some of the best CEOs I've seen around the world are political leaders or people that are willing to make bets. Because if all you're going to do is be conservative and all you're going to do is be 3 or 4% better next year, than you were last year, you're never going to make that leapfrog. And you're never going to really change the economics of your business because everything is continuously being disintermediated. I can name you can name any industry, and I'll tell you about how it's being disintermediated today. So this notion of bets based upon knowledge, whatever accumulated knowledge you can package together, has to be part of the story. But, you know, it does have its risks.
So we're in an interesting world in telecom because it's always a mixed economy. You know, the government is involved through both regulation or even, as we're seeing now in Australia, in investment. The private sector is in the operation business and so forth. We're seeing Australia make a major bet on fiber to the home with optical networking. How do you work in that environment successfully? I mean, it's tough because you don't have the freedom that a CEO would often have in a company because it really is this mixed space between government and industry, almost always has been in telecommunications.
Well, Larry, I'm a very strong believer in markets and letting markets work. And I think the two best examples we have in kind of the shared space that everybody in this room focuses on is the internet, where there's been no government, essentially regulating it, trying to control it, trying to do much, other than
helping create it.
Catalyzing at the beginning.
Right.
But that was catalyzing.
Yes.
It was not about controlling, not building, not doing anything, but catalyzing. The second phenomenon, and I would call that pretty significant, the second phenomenon that we've had is wireless. Mm-hmm. You know, name anything in the world that more people have than a mobile phone or access to mobile service. Africa, you know, any part of Asia or any part of the world you can name. Everybody is getting access, and we're going to have more people using mobile devices and accessing service than anything else in the world. Guess what? No government, no involvement other than issuing licenses.
Right, defining the spectrum.
So it's catalyzing, but not owning and controlling and building and all that. Now, I can give you 1,000 examples in our industry around the world, because I've worked around the world, where governments have built, owned, controlled things, and that's generally when you don't see the innovation, the speed, the success, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a balance here in terms of how to think about it. My view is that governments can play roles in catalyzing, but there's not any great examples of where they've built things, they run, they work well, they evolve, et cetera, et cetera. So in our industry, it's always difficult finding that right balance. And you just have to work your way through it.
So, I mean, you're one of the few people that have tried to find that balance in three very different, although English-speaking countries, UK, America, United States, and Australia. How do you compare and contrast? I mean, they were at different times, so it's not exactly fair, you know. But what was the good and the bad of each of those areas from your point of view?
Well, you know, to me, I use the phrase a lot that I've seen this movie before, and certain markets are moving at different speeds. If you look at the fixed line world, the U.S. leads the world by a lot. And I know that sometimes there's debates here in the U.S. that people say we're lagging, you know, other places. I'll tell you what, if you live around the rest of the world, you'd find that the U.S. leads. The U.S. lags on the wireless side. You know, Europe initially jumped out ahead. Asia kind of took the lead for a while. I would say Australia now leads the world in terms of the wireless set of capabilities. But it all evolves, and the interesting thing is that everybody finds a place. In the case of wireless, you know, letting markets work by themselves has been a phenomenal success. Fixed line has been where there's just so much regulation, so much government involvement, and that's where you can correlate the least amount of innovation and the toughest kind of investment environment. And I'm a believer, and I think we can say this across almost every sector, the best thing to do is to create environments where people want to invest and risk capital. And if they do that, they've done their job. If they try to control it and decide winners and losers and all that, markets get distorted.
Well, one of the interesting things is although wireless, you're talking to the cell tower, but then the cell towers are connected by the fixed optical network. So they actually interact with each other. As we see this explosion of use of wireless, that alone is going to generate even more data to be taken over the optical backbone, let alone the fiber to the home and businesses and so forth. And so there's got to be this continual upgrading of capacity. And we've seen wavelength division multiplexing, we've seen having to have, we can go much further without regeneration. How do you see that optical space? Because it's sort of more easy to see the wireless because we sort of carry something around. The optical tends to be a little more invisible in the background, and yet it's quite remarkable, the increase in capacity.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And part of what I describe as this next generation experience, the one button, one click, real time, is not just about having a fixed line, whether it's the copper loop or even a fiber to the home. That's all nice, but you do need that backhaul network to create an end-to-end experience. And the investment there, there's hardly a problem with that in most places around the world, almost every continent, because the economics work better. It's because you can aggregate a lot of traffic, make generally a very targeted kind of investment. And I think markets will work well in terms of making the investments to build bigger pipes, more glass, and essentially multiplex with some of the technologies that are evolving. I think most people have been too constrained by what I call the old market criteria. And I'll tell you about our industry. If you're a CEO and you go meet with kind of the investing community and most analysts, they always ask you about your CapEx to sales. And in our industry, in particular in Europe, you'll find that there's this magical 10% of CapEx to sales ratio. And if you do that, there was a feeling that you were optimizing kind of that balance of spend with revenues. My view is that basically you can accelerate your CapEx to sales if you have growth. And if you're a believer that whether it's wireless, fixed line, whatever method that's going to be delivering more services carried on those networks, there's going to be more revenue. And we've proven that business case. That was a hypothesis 4 years ago that I had. We've proven it over and over again. When we made our investments, we've earned back the investments very well and invested in the backhaul because we knew that experience required the backhaul.
Right.
So fiber is critical on the backhaul side, and you got to have enough depending upon the services that you're going to deliver.
Right. So you're a free man now, as of a few days ago. You're looking out, I'm sure, thinking about opportunities in the future. What areas, without revealing any secrets, what areas are you looking at as being very exciting over, say, the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, Larry, I think it goes back to your question on this gigabit age. It goes back to what I would call our next G, next IP kind of experience. The biggest problems that have to be solved for all of this to really happen is the customer experience. I gave a speech here at FiRe, an opening speech about 3 or 4 years ago about the one button, one click. This is pre-Apple iPhone and all that. But I would say Apple has done a terrific job kind of simplifying an experience, reducing latencies and all that sort of thing. I think the next big breakthrough has to come in this customer experience. The fiber is going to be there, the wireless networks are going to be there, the technologies are going to be there, but to stitch together in the case, I'll use the example of how we thought about our wireless network. we thought about the wireless HSDPA, HSPA, HSPA plus, LTE kind of migration. We actually built out backhaul because we knew that this experience end-to-end was important. We spent time with Qualcomm in particular on the chipsets.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, receive and send diversity and all kinds of issues are real issues as part of an experience. Then the device manufacturers in driving this kind of simplified interface kind of experience. And then ultimately, you know, your retail presence. It's one thing to say you have a great capability and it's got all kinds of things, but if I'm frightened by it when I see it and I don't use it, then it doesn't matter.
Right.
So it's kind of that end-to-end. So my view right now is that, you know, that we as an industry have to collectively solve some of those problems and be very, very disciplined and focused on how we measure it so that people can realize the gigabit future.
Well, I think we've got about 2 minutes left. Let's see, if we get the lights up, maybe we could get a question or two in. Sure. Yeah, go ahead. There's a microphone coming.
My name is Cameron Elahian, and for full disclosure, I am a founding investor behind BSIM Corporation, which provides WiMAX. I have a fundamental, I guess, question about what you have mentioned. Having used multiple 3G services available in here or in Europe as I've traveled. And I mentioned I have not been to Australia recently to use my 3G phone over there. I have not seen, either in US or Europe, 7 megabits per second on my mobile. To be honest with you, I still have problems living in Silicon Valley, having a continuous call going from my office to my home. So when you say that the US is behind in mobile technology, I absolutely agree with that. But I'm just curious, how is it that you're talking about 21 megabits per second? Are you talking about per user or are you talking per cell? Because backhauling, aggregation and backhaul of that kind of a thing per user requires fiber behind every one of your base stations, and that's pretty significant expense knowing how big Australia is. So it requires gazillions of dollars, not just billions. And did you get a government bailout somewhere, or how did these things happen? It just doesn't sound like what you're saying matches the claims that even Qualcomm has about how many bits per second users are getting.
It's a great question. The speeds that we have are peak throughput speeds, and obviously they're dependent upon the cell site, right? By cell site. We have, and so simultaneous use will obviously reduce the amount of actual experience that you have at any point in time. We've put in the fiber, we put in the fast Ethernet upgrades in terms of how we're going to deliver that end-to-end experience. I would say that the average throughputs at 7.2 that we've been operating at prior to our upgrade to 21, our average speeds were probably in the range of 3 to 4 megabits per second, average. And you'll get some higher, and you'll get, you know, at very peak periods within a cell site, in a sector of a cell site, you'll get some degradation. But, you know, that's how networks are managed, and they've been managed that way, fixed line, everything for 100 plus years. So we have managed that. But you do have to make the investments. The investments actually have been great investments for us, because our returns and payback periods have been very short, given the acceleration. Just one quick fact. One of the bets that we made was to spend over $1 billion doing this. Basically, I was roundly criticized, as I have been for many things in Australia. But when we made this bet, everybody pointed to Europe, and they said, well, look at 3G rollouts in Europe. Nobody's generating any more ARPU, 1 or 2 euros. I bet that we would generate $10 to $20 more ARPU per month per user. I was wrong. We've generated between $20 and $30 of additional ARPU per user per month, which has been massive in terms of changing the game for us.
That's all the time we have. Let's thank all.
All right. Thank you, Liz.